Imagine this, a struggling single mother risks every penny she has on an old forgotten farm at a tense county auction only to stumble upon a hidden safe buried beneath the floorboards. Inside lies something far more valuable than gold, triggering a fierce showdown between relentless big city developers and a community determined to preserve its roots amidst crumbling barns and secret orchards. One woman's courage ignites a legacy that changes everything. If you've ever fought to protect your family or felt the pride of hard-won victory, this incredible true story is for you. So sit tight, subscribe and prepare yourself because what they discovered next will leave you stunned. Carla Dawson stood at the edge of the long-neglected orchard, the chilly autumn breeze sending a scattering of dried leaves across her feet. She was a single mother with two children, Tessa and Jonah, and she had just made the most impulsive decision of her life, using the last of her savings to buy the abandoned Redwood Grove farm at a county auction. In truth, she had driven by this place countless times on her way to the cafe where she pulled double shifts, always wondering about the stories its sprawling fields and old farmhouse might hold. The orchard's gnarled apple trees were now choked with weeds. The barn's once bright red paint had faded and peeled, and the wraparound porch sagged under the weight of time. Yet Carla felt a strange sense of belonging the moment she first saw the listing for Redwood Grove. Despite its crumbling fences and boarded-up windows, she couldn't shake the conviction that this place was meant to be hers. She had arrived that morning to see the auction company staff hammer foreclosure sale signs into the ground. Each strike of the hammer echoed like a final nail in a dream that someone else a long time ago must have cherished. From a distance, Tessa, her 10-year-old daughter, clutched a thermos of hot cocoa, her eyes wide. Jonah, 14, stood silently next to his mother, shifting from foot to foot in a mixture of curiosity and anxiety. Carla hardly had words for them when they first saw Redwood Grove up close. The property included a main house that was said to be over a century old, a large barn that had partially caved in on one side, and 120 acres of land, much of it overrun with wild grass and tangled brush. The orchard, once renowned for its apples, so local rumor went, looked like it was in desperate need of pruning and care. Carla knew her meager resources were barely enough to think about normal housing, let alone manage a farm in such disrepair. Still, she felt a pull as if the land were calling her to begin anew. Several onlookers, including neighbors and curious locals, had gathered for the auction. Among them, Carla spotted Harriet, her boss at the cafe, waving in her direction. News travels fast in Barton County, population 5,000. And Carla's interest in Redwood Grove was no secret. Harriet had heard that Summit Peak Developers, an outfit known for buying up rural land to create high-end residential communities, would also be present. Rumor was that Summit Peak, led locally by a man named Robert Chang, had big plans for properties just like Redwood Grove. They specialized in turning farmland into manicured suburban neighborhoods with fancy gates and uniform houses. Each time, Carla imagined bulldozers plowing down the orchard, replacing century-old apple trees with concrete sidewalks. She felt a pang of anger and sadness. But how realistically could she compete with Summit Peak? Carla's finances were precarious. 6 years before she had lost her husband, Mark, in a sudden accident, between medical bills, raising 2 children on her own, and living on a waitress's wage plus tips. Carla's credit had taken a beating. The little insurance money she'd received was almost entirely depleted, and she had exactly $32,000 left in a savings account she'd guarded fiercely. She knew Redwood Grove's last appraised value was once close to $400,000 in better times. But the property's remote location, years of abandonment, and the general economic slump had slashed its worth considerably. The bank representative had mentioned that the auction would probably start at $85,000. Even so, bidding could easily go well beyond Carla's financial limit, and her heart raced at the thought of throwing all her chips in. Tessa tugged on her jacket. "Mom," she asked tentatively, "are we really going to buy a whole farm?" Carla could only manage a wry smile. "I don't know yet, honey," she admitted, hugging Tessa's shoulders. Jonah, ever the protective older brother, handed his mother a cup of cocoa. "Miss Watson from the bank called," he informed Carla. "She said she's still processing your application, but it might not go through. Something about your credit score." Carla swallowed hard, trying to keep her composure. She had never wanted to drag her children into the gritty details of her finances, but life circumstances had forced them to grow up quickly. If Redwood Grove slipped through their fingers, they would remain crammed in their small 2-bedroom apartment. Carla would keep grinding away at the cafe, pinching pennies for years to come. The dream of open space, fresh air, and a chance to build something of their own would remain a dream. Nothing more, the auction commenced at 10 in the morning. Sharp, the auctioneer, a jovial-looking man with a salt and pepper mustache, stood on a makeshift podium overlooking the property's main driveway. He explained the rules. The property would be sold as is cash or pre-approved financing only, and a 10% deposit due immediately. Once he was done with the preliminaries, he called out the starting bid, $85,000. Carla could feel her pulse pound in her ears. She lifted her bidder's card number 14, barely believing she was actually doing this. 85,000 from bidder number 14, the auctioneer boomed. Do I hear 90? Across the small crowd, a hand immediately went up, one of Robert Chang's associates from Summit Peak, dressed in a crisp blazer with an air of calm inevitability. 90,000, the auctioneer repeated, turning back to Carla. She raised her card again. 95,000. The volley continued, with Carla's face growing hot and her palms sweaty as the numbers climbed. 100,000, 105, 110. Carla was at her absolute ceiling, having cobbled together her last savings plus a small bank loan. She swallowed down a wave of disappointment when Robert Chang's associate countered at 115,000. Carla paused, her card trembling in her hand. She lowered it, shoulders slumping. She simply couldn't go higher. Tessa and Jonah looked crestfallen, Tessa's lower lip quivering. Carla turned to her kids and mouthed, "I'm sorry," bracing herself for that soul-crushing bang of the gavel. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the tension. 120,000. Everyone turned to see a woman in her 60s with neatly kept gray hair holding up a bidder's card. Carla recognized her vaguely as Helena Morrison, rumored to have deep pockets and a passion for historic preservation. Robert Chang's associate blinked, apparently caught off guard. He consulted briefly with someone on his phone, then raised the bid to 125. Without hesitation, Helena Morrison upped it to 130. The crowd drew in its breath. Bystanders whispered to one another. Why would anyone fight so hard for a property whose value was questionable at best? Robert Chang himself stepped forward, mask-like calm on his face. He lifted his own bidder's card at 135,000, but Helena countered at 150,000 within seconds. Stunned silence fell. Chang conferred heatedly with two other men in suits, but they appeared to shake their heads. "We're out," Chang finally said, his frustration slipping through his polished demeanor. The auctioneer surveyed the crowd. No one else dared to top that last figure. "Going once, going twice. Sold to bidder number 9 for $150,000, he pronounced, banging the gavel with finality. A wave of disbelief washed over Carla. She had lost Redwood. Grove Farm was gone, but not to Summit Peak. It now belonged to this mysterious silver-haired woman. Tessa squeezed Carla's hand, tears brimming in her eyes. "It's okay," Carla whispered, fighting her own sense of loss. "We'll figure something out." Jonah pursed his lips, trying to appear stoic despite his disappointment. As the crowd dispersed, Carla felt she owed the new owner a word of congratulations, at least. Approaching Helena, she introduced herself politely. "Hi, I'm Carla Dawson. I was also bidding. Congratulations on winning Redwood Grove Farm." Helena turned her penetrating gaze on Carla. "You're Carla, the waitress at Harriet's Cafe, right? Mother of Tessa. And Jonah, correct?" Carla's eyebrows rose. How did Helena know so much, small county? Helena said with a knowing smile, answering Carla's unspoken question. "I make it my business to be informed when I consider purchasing a property." Carla nodded, feeling both fascination and intimidation. "Do you plan on developing Redwood Grove?" she asked. Helena shook her head. "I have other ideas," she responded cryptically. Then after a pause, she added, "I'd like you to join me for lunch at the cafe tomorrow, if possible. There's a proposition I'd like to discuss, and I believe it involves you and this farm." Carla could only blink in surprise. She stared after Helena Morrison as the older woman walked to her car, calm and poised, leaving Carla with a swirl of questions she had no immediate answers for. The next day, Carla arrived at Harriet's Cafe just before noon, nerves fluttering in her stomach. She spotted Helena Morrison seated in a corner booth, a manila folder and a legal pad in front of her. Even though Carla wasn't working that shift, Harriet had discreetly made sure to place a pot of fresh coffee and 2 cups on the table. After a polite exchange of greetings, Helena got right to the point. "I bought Redwood Grove Farm," she said evenly, "but I have no intention of flipping it to a developer or letting it languish. My main interest is in rural preservation, restoring historically significant farms, and ensuring they remain working properties, not bulldozed for high-end housing." Carla listened, uncertain where this was leading. Helena then handed Carla a typed proposal on official letterhead, Morrison Preservation Trust. As Carla skimmed the document, her eyes widened. It outlined an arrangement in which Helena's trust would retain ownership of Redwood Grove's land, but Carla would enter a 99-year lease with an option to purchase after 5 years. Helena would provide an initial sum of capital for restoring the orchard, renovating essential buildings, and jump-starting a viable agricultural business. Carla, in return, would commit to living on the farm, with her family overseeing daily operations and adhering to certain historical and environmental guidelines. Why me? Carla blurted out. The question had been burning in her mind ever since Helena first hinted at this proposition. After all, Carla was just a waitress, a single mom with limited funds, and no formal agricultural credentials. Because you cared enough to bid every last cent on that farm, Helena replied. Because you have practical experience. Didn't your grandparents manage a small orchard in Maine? I've done my homework, and because Redwood Grove deserves someone who sees its potential, not just its problems. Carla felt her heart leap at the validation even as her practical side warred with caution. The older woman laid out the plan. Carla would receive a modest living stipend during the first year while the orchard was being rehabilitated. She would live in a caretaker's cottage on the property, which Helena assured her was structurally sound, though it needed cosmetic upgrades. Over time, they would collaborate to revitalize Redwood Grove's existing apple orchard, adding a cidery operation and possibly a pick-your-own-fruit component, depending on the orchard's health. Helena also mentioned the neglected barn could be turned into an event space, eventually generating extra revenue. You would own the business itself, Helena clarified, and all profits once you start making them. The trust role is more like a silent partner providing capital and ensuring the property's historical integrity. Carla set the pages down, her head spinning. It sounded too good to be true. What's the catch? She asked, half expecting Helena to say she needed a down payment Carla simply didn't have. The only catch, if you want to call it that, Helena replied, is that you'll be committing to a massive amount of work. Running a farm is demanding physically and mentally, and success isn't guaranteed. Carla glanced at Tessa and Jonah, who had tagged along, though they sat at a separate table with coloring sheets and some leftover pie. She thought about stability. One side of her yearned for security, maybe even a different job in a neighboring town, something with a steady paycheck. But Redwood Grove had ignited a spark within her, reminding her of childhood, summer visits to her grandfather's orchard. The door to the cafe jingled as Robert Chang entered, scanning for Helena. The developer spotted her and walked over. He looked annoyed at Carla's presence. Miss Morrison Chang said in a clipped tone about Redwood Grove Summit, "Peak remains ready to make you a significant offer if you'd consider selling." Helena coolly met his gaze. "It's not for sale, Mr. Chang," she said pointedly. Chang bristled, tried to argue, but Helena shut down the conversation with a firm wave of her hand. "I'm in the midst of a private meeting," she said, her polite smile barely masking her impatience. Chang retreated, shooting Carla a sharp look on his way out. Helena turned back to Carla. So she said, tapping the manila folder, "Take this proposal home. Read every line carefully. Bring it to a lawyer if you'd like. I'm not in a rush for an answer. But if you say yes, we can start work on Redwood Grove immediately. You'll have your children settled in the caretaker's cottage before winter sets in, and we can plan a timeline for orchard renovation." Carla swallowed, feeling a mix of awe, fear, and excitement swirling inside her. She could hardly believe that after losing the bid, she was being offered a second chance, perhaps a more extraordinary one than she'd dared to imagine. That weekend, Carla barely slept. The proposal from Helena Morrison was spread out on the small dining table in their cramped apartment, alongside spreadsheets, bank statements, and the meager loan offers she'd been able to secure. Jonah read the document with her quietly pointing out sections requiring a signature from both her and Helena's trust. Tessa, younger and less concerned with legal fine print, hovered excitedly. She asked questions about the orchard, about where her new bedroom might be, and whether they could have a few goats or chickens. Carla's head spun with the sheer number of things to consider: her job at the cafe, the children's school, the massive leap of faith it would take to become a farm manager overnight. By Sunday afternoon, Carla decided they'd needed to see Redwood Grove again, this time with the caretaker's cottage in mind. She asked Harriet's husband, a part-time handyman, to come along and evaluate the structure. They arrived to find Sam, an older caretaker who had looked after the property sporadically for the bank waiting by the gate. He gave them a friendly nod, tipping his worn cap. "Mrs. Morrison told me to let you have full access," he explained. "Go right in." The caretaker's cottage wasn't large, just 2 bedrooms, a small living area, and a simple kitchen, but it had functional plumbing, a roof that appeared intact, and electricity that only needed a quick inspection to confirm safety. Yes, the paint was peeling. The floors were scuffed and the windows were drafty, but Carla's handyman friend concluded it was habitable with minimal, immediate repairs. "You can paint the walls, fix the weather stripping, maybe upgrade the insulation," he said. Not too bad for a starter place, satisfied with the cottage. Carla and her kids wandered toward the main farmhouse. It felt different than it did on auction day, when her nerves had been on edge. Now she could actually see the angles of the gables, the detail in the porch rails, and the sturdy stone foundation that had been overshadowed by peeling paint. As they ventured into the large living room, Carla noticed something odd about the wooden floor near the fireplace, a subtle shift in the color and grain pattern that didn't match the rest. She knelt and ran her fingers along the seams. Sam ambled over, shining a flashlight. He chuckled. "Looks like a hidden compartment," he remarked. "Old folks used to keep valuables stashed under floorboards during the Depression, even earlier. Sometimes. Could be empty. Could be something interesting." Jonah, standing nearby, looked intrigued. "Wow, so there might be something actually hidden under there." Tessa clapped her hands excitedly. Carla pried gently at the edge of the board, and to her surprise, it lifted with a soft creak. The space beneath was shallow and dusty, nothing more than a small wooden enclosure with a few scattered nails and bits of paper too deteriorated to read. Disappointment flickered across Tessa's face, though Sam looked amused. "Still, who knows what else might be in this old place," he said. "A lot of these century-old homes have secret corners. False walls, you name it." That evening, Carla set her kids up in the living room with pizza and a movie, while she retreated to the kitchen table to reread Helena's proposal. If she agreed, she'd need to inform the cafe that she was quitting, unless there was a possibility of part-time weekend work for extra cash. Could she really manage Redwood Grove and still hold a side job? Was it financially and emotionally reckless to uproot everything on the promise of a project that could fail? She toyed with the calculator, punching in hypothetical orchard yields, possible cider production revenues, and the costs of barn repairs. Even in her most optimistic projections, the numbers looked tight for at least the first 3 years. One crop failure or an unexpected expense could spell disaster. Yet the alternative, turning down this once-in-a-lifetime offer, felt equally daunting. She remembered the look on Tessa's face whenever the girl talked about orchard flowers and fresh apples. She thought about Jonah's silent plea for something more meaningful than the cramped apartment and the perpetual tightrope walk of bills and finances, and she felt a stirring within herself, recalling the orchard visits with her late grandfather in Maine. He'd taught her how to check an apple's ripeness, how to prune a branch, how to respect the land. Those memories still glowed in her mind, a testament to a simpler, happier time. By Monday morning, Carla had made her decision. She called Helena, voice trembling with a mix of fear and exhilaration. "I'm in," she said. "I accept your proposal, but I do have one condition." Helena's tone remained warm but businesslike. "Go on," she encouraged. Carla asked for a clear path to full ownership beyond just the 5-year option. "If I invest my time and energy into Redwood Grove, I'd like the contract to reflect that I can buy it outright down the road," Carla explained. "I want to be sure all the improvements we make count toward a fair market value. Should I exercise that option?" Helena was silent for a few moments before agreeing. "We can amend the contract," she said. "I respect you for wanting clarity." The next step involved signing a more comprehensive agreement at Helena's office, a surprisingly modest suite located in a converted barn at the edge of Barton County. There, Carla learned more about the Morrison Preservation Trust. Helena was something of a philanthropist, using her fortune to rescue old farms from foreclosure or neglect, then partnering with individuals who had a genuine passion for the land. "I lost my own family farm to developers many years ago," Helena confided, her gaze distant as she sipped coffee. "I was young and fixated on a career in law. By the time I wanted to come back, it was gone. Subdivided, built over. I can't change that. But maybe I can prevent it from happening to other places that deserve a second chance." With the signatures inked and the final documents notarized, Carla walked out of Helena's office as the new caretaker and eventual co-owner of Redwood Grove Farm. Her heart pounded with a complex mix of worry and hope. She had pledged to move into the caretaker's cottage in 2 weeks, an impossibly short time to uproot from the apartment she'd lived in for nearly 7 years. Excitement momentarily drowned out all logistical concerns. When she told Tessa and Jonah that the farm was officially theirs to transform, their cheers, mixed with a bit of stunned silence, reminded her why she was doing this in the first place. The following days were a whirlwind. Carla gave notice at Harriet's cafe. Her boss, Harriet, responded with both disappointment and pride, even rallying the staff to contribute to a small Carla's Farm Fund. They handed her an envelope with several $100s in amount that made Carla want to cry with gratitude. Volunteers began to appear, many of them regulars at the cafe who had come to know Carla Ball over the years and wanted to show support. Mr. Wilcox, an elderly neighbor, offered to lend his old pickup for hauling supplies. A retired schoolteacher volunteered to tutor Tessa and Jonah whenever they needed help adjusting to a new schedule. "We heard you're saving Redwood Grove," one woman told Carla. "That means a lot in a place like Barton County, where farmland's vanishing every year." On a brisk Saturday morning, Carla stood amidst a pile of half-packed boxes in her apartment, watching as Jonah carefully placed labeled items in a taped-up carton. Tessa tried to help, though she mostly supervised her brother. Carla realized she had hardly any furniture suitable for a house, let alone a farm cottage. She also didn't have the slightest idea how to run an orchard, but something about this sudden upheaval felt right. Perhaps her late husband, Mark, had been the dreamer, always talking about living somewhere rural with open skies and fields. Maybe it was time she inherited that spirit. Harriet arrived in her minivan, arms loaded with cleaning supplies and extra cardboard boxes ready to help the family move. Soon the apartment was abuzz with neighbors dropping by to say their goodbyes, hauling items down to trucks, and exchanging jokes about Carla's new life as a farmer. Carla, arms weighed down by linens, paused to absorb the scene. So many people, many of whom she only knew by first names, working together. It was the most tangible sense of community she'd felt in years. Moving day dawned clear and bright, the sun's rays illuminating a crisp blue sky. Carla caravaned to Redwood Grove in a borrowed pickup and 2 cars stuffed with closed kitchenware and battered furniture. Tessa clutched the family cat Willow, ironically named long before Redwood Grove was even on the horizon, while Jonah did a final check on the apartment to ensure they hadn't left anything behind. As they pulled up to the caretaker's cottage, Carla was struck again by how it all looked different from a mere 2 weeks ago. A group of volunteer carpenters had already repaired the most glaring damage to the cottage, patching the roof where shingles had been missing, reinforcing a wobbly porch step, and ensuring the plumbing didn't leak. When she stepped inside, the smell of fresh paint greeted her, and she even noticed a bouquet of wildflowers on the kitchen counter left by an anonymous well-wisher. "Welcome home," Sam said gruffly as he handed Carla the cottage keys. "I checked the water heater this morning. Everything's good to go." Her heart swelled with gratitude, not just for Sam, but for everyone who had shown up to make this transition possible. Boxes were soon piled high in the living room, and Harriet set up an impromptu food station with sandwiches and iced tea. Tessa and Jonah darted around claiming their bedrooms. The caretaker's cottage was small enough that Jonah would likely sleep on a fold-out couch if Tessa needed privacy, but neither child complained. They were far too excited about the orchard they could see out the window, the orchard that was now theirs to restore. Once the majority of boxes were hauled inside, Carla allowed herself a quick break. She wandered outside, crossing the driveway to inspect the orchard more closely. She ran her hand over the rough bark of one gnarled apple tree. A few shriveled apples from the last season still clung to branches. It was early autumn, and most of the apples had likely dropped rotted or been eaten by wildlife. She noticed half-cleared rows, weedy undergrowth, and a scattering of old wooden crates that had probably once been used for harvest. "You're seeing a lot of work," came Sam's voice behind her, "but I see a lot of potential. Some of these trees have survived on their own for years. Imagine what they could do with real care." Carla nodded, feeling the surge of optimism. "I'm thinking about starting with the orchard closest to the barn," she said. "Just a few acres at first to see if we can salvage them, then maybe replant the worst sections." Sam scratched his chin. "You'll want an expert's help with orchard management. I can prune a branch or two, but my knowledge is limited," he admitted. "Though I hear Dr. Miriam Oakley over at the State University is a pomology whiz. She visits local orchards, sometimes offering consultations." Later that afternoon, Helena made an appearance, stepping out of her sleek car with a bright smile. "Welcome to Redwood Grove," she said, offering Carla a handshake that felt more like a seal of partnership than a mere greeting. She brought along more papers, budgets for orchard supplies, a schedule for phased renovations of the barn, and marketing ideas for when they had enough apples to produce cider. "There's a reason I want you to consider the cidery sooner rather than later," Helena explained, pointing to a spreadsheet detailing craft cider market trends. "Craft beverages with a historical or heritage angle have been doing well. Once you get your orchard producing reliably, you can stand out by emphasizing Redwood Grove's rich past. Carla studied the numbers, a little overwhelmed, but also intrigued. If Redwood Grove's orchard could provide unique apple varieties, they might carve out a niche in a competitive marketplace. It all hinges on the orchard being healthy, Carla said. Helena agreed. We'll need professional input. Some trees might be too far gone. Some might be salvageable with careful pruning and disease management. And if we're lucky, there might be hidden gems. Carla thought of the rumored stories that Redwood Grove once held specialty apple varieties planted by its original owner. She made a mental note to look into it, for now, though, dinner was calling, and she still had to unearth the family's plates and silverware from a mountain of boxes. A week later, Dr. Miriam Oakley, the pomologist from the State University, arrived for her first tour of Redwood Grove's orchard. She was a petite woman with steel gray hair and a brisk, purposeful manner. Carla walked the rows with her as she snapped pictures and took notes. Now that Carla lived on site, she was discovering just how tangled and wild the orchard had become after years of neglect. Underbrush and invasive vines choked many of the trees, and entire rows were barely recognizable, hidden by dense thickets. Oakley's verdict was cautiously optimistic. Many trees were salvageable if they acted quickly to prune dead wood, clear out overgrowth, and address signs of fire blight or apple scab. You'll have a reduced yield for a few seasons, Dr. Oakley warned, but with time you can restore a good portion of this orchard. Helena joined them halfway through, discussing how the Morrison Preservation Trust could fund the immediate cleanup. She also brought up an interesting tidbit. The county records suggest Redwood Grove Farm dates back to 1886, when Franklin Redwood established it. Some local legends say he experimented with new grafting techniques. Who knows? We might stumble upon rare heritage varieties. Dr. Oakley's eyes lit up. She was always on the lookout for historically significant apple cultivars. We should carefully label each tree we think is unique, she suggested. Any unusual apples we find, we can have them analyzed. Carla's days soon settled into a rhythm. Early mornings, she and Jonah would check the orchard clearing brush or marking damaged trees. Tessa, though, younger, found ways to help, such as collecting fallen apples to compost or labeling piles of branches. By mid-morning, Carla might meet with Sam or Harriet, who sometimes visited to drop off supplies and moral support, or speak with Helena about finances. Afternoons often involved more orchard chores, hauling away debris, trimming, or patching up the caretaker's cottage. Evenings were spent with the kids, often out on the porch overlooking the fields, though they also dealt with the new chores that came with country living, such as beating back the seemingly endless spider population. Beyond the orchard, Carla also explored the main farmhouse. It was structurally unsound in some sections, but she saw glimpses of its former grandeur in the intricate banister leading upstairs, the crown molding along the parlor ceiling, and the wide plank wood floors that bore generations of scuff marks. She discovered more curious elements, like a second dead space behind a closet wall that hinted at yet another hidden compartment. The caretaker theorized that Franklin Redwood might have built various secret nooks to store valuables. People did that back then, Sam mused. Banks weren't always trusted, especially during financial panics. Meanwhile, Robert Chang and Summit Peak had not faded into the background. Word spread around Barton County that Summit Peak was busily purchasing every distressed farm within 30 miles. Carla watched with an uneasy feeling as a couple of her new neighbors gave in and sold family land after failing to secure better deals. Summit Peak's strategy was to offer quick cash sums that were hard for struggling farmers to refuse. Rumor had it they planned a massive residential development. Carla feared Redwood Grove, even with Helena's backing, might stand alone, surrounded by construction sites and cookie-cutter houses, if Summit Peak succeeded in its expansions. Yet Redwood Grove's resurrection was garnering interest too. A local newspaper ran a small feature about Carla's efforts, highlighting the orchard's potential revival. People began dropping by to inquire about picking apples, even though Carla had to gently turn them away until the orchard was stable enough to host visitors. Still, the publicity helped. Occasionally, someone would show up with old ledgers or historical photographs, hoping they might belong to Redwood Grove. It was as if the farm's story was slowly re-emerging from the dust of forgotten archives. Late one afternoon, Carla, Jonah, and Tessa were poking around the main farmhouse's dusty living room, the same space where they'd initially discovered the small floor compartment. Jonah had found an odd gap near the large stone fireplace. "Mom," he called out, "there's a crack in the mortar here, and it kind of looks like a door." Intrigued, Carla grabbed a flashlight and joined him. Sure enough, the rectangular shape in the stonework was ever so slightly askew. The kids tugged on it, but it wouldn't budge. Carla tapped it with the handle of a small crowbar, producing a faintly hollow sound. Could this be another hidden compartment? They fetched Sam, who was rummaging for leftover building supplies in the barn. Together, they tried applying gentle pressure to different stones around the fireplace. Finally, Sam discovered a pivot point. With a groan of old hinges, a section of the wall swung open, revealing a dark recess. Carla's heart thudded with anticipation. She shone her flashlight inside and saw the distinct shape of an iron safe the size of a small trunk. Decorative metal scrollwork and a faded nameplate at the center read F. Redwood & Co., 1886. Whoa! Jonah breathed. Tessa gawked, barely believing what she was seeing. Carla felt lightheaded. A hidden safe. Possibly locked for decades, maybe a century. Sam examined the combination dial. This is definitely an antique, could be rusted shut. Carla ran her fingertips over the metal, imagining Franklin Redwood carefully sealing away valuables. But what family letters? Honoin. Carla quickly called Helena, who arrived the next morning with a local locksmith specializing in historical pieces. After a few hours of careful tinkering, the locksmith managed to crack open the safe. Inside was no shining trove of gold bars, but a collection of items that left Carla's hands trembling as she retrieved them. There were ledgers meticulously kept detailing the farm's financial and agricultural records from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. Bundles of letters tied with ribbon bore the Redwood family seal, and there was a wooden box that jingled with what sounded like metal objects. Perhaps the most intriguing item was a slim, leather-bound journal labeled with Franklin Redwood's initials, Helena Carla, and the kids carefully carried the contents to the caretaker's cottage, setting them gently on the kitchen table for examination. They discovered an envelope yellowed with age but neatly addressed, "To the future steward of Redwood Grove." Carla's pulse raced as she carefully pried it open. She read aloud, "If you have found this, you stand in my place, an inheritor of the dreams seated in these fields. I, Franklin Redwood, built this farm in 1886 with faith that its apple varieties would serve generations to come. Enclosed are documents chronicling my methods and the orchard's evolution. Cherish them, for the true wealth of this land lies not in coins, but in what we cultivate from soil and soul. May Redwood Grove continue to nourish many after I am gone." Stunned silence followed. Tessa stared wide-eyed while Jonah mumbled something about how incredible it was that Franklin Redwood had left a message seemingly directed at them. Helena teared up, admitting she felt honored to see such a direct link to Redwood Grove's founder. When they finally opened the wooden box, they discovered a small collection of gold coins, a modest stash but valuable enough to have made a difference in difficult times. "He must have left it as an emergency fund," Carla observed, recalling the letter's reference to coins. Perhaps Redwood had endured financial panics and decided the farm, and not the banks, would safeguard his assets. The real treasure, though, was in the ledgers and the journal. They contained orchard yield records, detailed notes about experimental grafting techniques, and drawings of apple cross-sections indicating new cultivars. Redwood had apparently bred himself. He was way ahead of his time, Dr. Oakley exclaimed when she was called to see the discoveries. If even a few of these experimental trees survive, we might have something truly unique on our hands. The discovery of Franklin Redwood's hidden safe electrified not just Carla and her children, but the wider community. Local history buffs flocked to Redwood Grove for a glimpse of the relics. Dr. Oakley arranged for careful scanning and preservation of the ledgers, while Helena proposed a small exhibit in the county museum that would tell Redwood Grove's story. Carla welcomed the attention, but also felt the weight of it, with so much interest stirred Redwood. Grove was no longer just a personal venture. It seemed to be shaping into a symbol of Barton County's agricultural heritage. In the months that followed, volunteer groups showed up on weekends to clear thick brush and help with orchard maintenance. With Dr. Oakley's guidance, Carla and her small team marked out sections of the orchard that needed minimal intervention versus those requiring replanting. They discovered that Redwood had indeed grafted a handful of trees with unusual characteristics, apples that were smaller, intensely flavored, and reportedly disease-resistant. The orchard was a living laboratory, albeit one left untended for decades. Carla decided to call these special varieties Redwood's Legacy apples, although formal identification tests by Dr. Oakley were ongoing. Meanwhile, Helena encouraged Carla to accelerate plans for a small cidery. Initially, the plan had been to wait a few years until the orchard was healthier, but Helena reasoned that they could start a limited production using some of the existing apples combined with select apples from neighboring farms. If Redwood Grove becomes known for unique, historically inspired ciders, Helena explained, it could jumpstart revenue and sustain longer-term orchard restoration. Carla agreed, though it meant more renovations for the barn turned cidery. Jonah, increasingly fascinated with all things mechanical, offered to help research cider-making equipment. He spent hours online reading about fermentation tanks, bottling lines, and artisanal cider recipes. Tessa, for her part, began collecting wildflowers around the property to press them into handmade cards she wanted to sell at a future farm stand. The children thrived under the new sense of purpose, each finding a niche that connected them to Redwood Grove's revival. But not everyone welcomed this burst of new life. Robert Chang in Summit Peak noticed Redwood Grove's rising popularity with some frustration. More than once, Chang paid Carla a visit, flashing that professional smile. He'd ask if Helena might be willing to sell Redwood Grove at a profit, or if Carla herself wanted to make an arrangement. Summit Peak would fund a grander cider facility in exchange for co-developing the land. Carla politely but firmly refused each time. She suspected Chang was more interested in Redwood Grove's water rights, in brand potential, than in preserving any orchard heritage. Tensions came to a head during a Barton County Commission meeting over land use proposals. Summit Peak, having purchased multiple adjacent properties, wanted rezoning to allow for a massive luxury development. Chang stood at the podium, presenting glossy renderings of neighborhoods, a golf course, and a boutique hotel. Carla, along with a coalition of local farmers, argued passionately for preserving farmland and existing water rights. Helena provided legal arguments citing historical significance. Community members packed the small courthouse room, some favoring growth and new jobs, others fearful it would suffocate the county's agricultural backbone. Though the commission delayed its decision, Carla left with a sense that Redwood Grove was caught in a larger battle, one that pitted farmland preservation against the lure of new tax revenue from Summit Peak's developments. Despite the political uncertainty, life at Redwood Grove carried on. The first small batch cider was ready for tasting that late spring. It was produced from older standard apple varieties, not yet the rare Redwood's legacy cultivars. Carla, Jonah, and Tessa held a makeshift tasting event in the partially renovated barn, inviting neighbors and volunteers. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, spurring Carla to consider formalizing Redwood Grove Cider Co. "It tastes like dedication," one neighbor joked, finishing his glass. Carla beamed with pride. She remembered late nights researching fermentation, early mornings tending trees, and the ongoing financial juggling act. All at once, she felt validated. Summer rolled in with bright skies and the smell of fresh-cut grass drifting across Barton County. At Redwood Grove Orchard, rehabilitation was in full swing. Several local students from the high school agriculture program volunteered to help, seeing it as a chance for hands-on learning. They pulled weeds, installed new irrigation lines, and helped Dr. Oakley graft Redwood's legacy shoots onto healthy rootstocks. Carla was astonished at the positive response. Children who might otherwise spend summers idling found purpose among the apple trees. On weekends, they even explored the forested section behind the barn, where rumor had it Franklin Redwood once kept livestock. Meanwhile, Helena arranged for an architectural team to assess the main farmhouse's structural needs. The house had historical value, so the trust wanted to restore it methodically rather than bulldoze or drastically remodel it. Carla found herself dreaming of the day they might live in the spacious old house with its wide windows overlooking the orchard. But for now, the caretaker's cottage remained home comfortable, though cramped. Tessa's room doubled as a storage space for orchard tools and marketing materials, while Jonah's fold-out couch took up most of the small living room. Yet neither of them complained. They had more space outdoors than they'd ever had in the city. As Redwood Grove's fortunes looked up, Robert Chang unleashed a new tactic, forming alliances with local businesses that stood to profit from development. Flyers sprouted around town proclaiming that Summit Peak's proposed community would bring hundreds of jobs, new schools, and improved infrastructure. Even Harriet's Cafe found itself courted by Summit Peak, which dangled the possibility of setting up a branch in the planned commercial district. Despite Harriet's personal loyalty to Carla, financial temptations were real. "It's not that I want them to succeed in paving over farmland," Harriet confessed to Carla during a chance meeting. "But Chang's offering big sums, and so many folks here are struggling. The city council might listen if they think it'll help the economy." At the same time, Redwood Grove was becoming a rallying point for those advocating slow, sustainable growth in Barton County. Carla discovered people wanted more than just a nostalgic orchard. They wanted a viable example of how agriculture could still thrive. Helena's attorneys advised forming a cooperative among small farmers to pool resources and take advantage of collective bargaining. If enough farms pledged not to sell to developers and agreed to certain environmental standards, they might secure county-level protections. Carla embraced the idea. She had visions of Redwood Grove not just standing alone, but inspiring a movement that would unite orchardists, dairy farmers, and vegetable growers who were determined to preserve the county's agricultural roots. But forming a cooperative took time, legal paperwork, and endless meetings. Carla struggled to juggle orchard duties, the cidery's startup demands, and the new role of advocate in county politics. She'd work past midnight, drafting proposals, emailing with Helena or the local farm bureau. Often she dozed off at the kitchen table, awakened by Tessa or Jonah urging her to get some proper rest. "Mom, you're not a robot," Jonah chided gently one night. "We need you healthy too." Carla smiled, ruffling his hair, and realized how her children had matured through this journey. The orchard, for its part, showed promising blooms that summer, though a full crop was still a ways off, Dr. Oakley was thrilled to find that several Redwood's legacy trees had survived another season, budding vigorously despite years of neglect. She had tested a few apples that matured early, finding remarkable flavor complexities. Word spread in niche culinary circles. One day, Carla received a call from a high-end chef in the city, inquiring about purchasing Redwood Legacy's apples as soon as they were available. She wasn't sure whether to laugh or cry at the notion that the orchard might become profitable sooner than she dared hope. In late summer, Barton County finally held the decisive hearing on Summit Peak's rezoning request and the newly proposed agricultural heritage zone spearheaded by Helena's legal team and other local advocates. The county courthouse was packed, standing room only, with local news cameras poised at the back. Robert Chang sat with a professional entourage armed with charts and economic projections showing job creation, tax revenue, and infrastructure improvements. Helena and Carla led the opposition, flanked by several local farmers who believed in preserving Barton County's agrarian way of life. Chang began the presentation, gliding through slides depicting scenic walking trails, a golf course, and a promise to retain the rural charm. The commissioners looked simultaneously impressed and wary. When it was Carla's turn, she stepped to the microphone, her heart thudding. She wasn't a polished speaker, but she had a genuine story. She described how Redwood Grove had transformed her life and how it could serve as a model for sustainable rural development. "We're not opposed to growth," Carla said, her voice echoing in the hushed courtroom. "We want growth that respects the heritage of this land, that values farms as more than empty lots waiting to be built upon. Redwood Grove isn't a museum piece. It's a working orchard that can provide jobs, education, and a unique product in the form of heritage ciders. We just ask the county to protect places like this rather than sacrifice them for quick commercial gains." Helena followed up with a meticulously researched legal argument detailing how farmland preservation zones have worked successfully in other regions, balancing progress with heritage. She pointed out potential conflicts Summit Peak's project might create, especially regarding water rights. The orchard and surrounding farms depended on a stable water table, something a large development could threaten. Chang countered with engineering reports claiming minimal impact, though skeptics in the crowd shook their heads. In the end, the commissioners voted to postpone a final decision, giving both sides a chance to refine their proposals. Frustrating though it was, Carla saw a silver lining. Redwood Grove and like-minded neighbors still had time to organize further. Outside the courthouse, Chang stopped Carla as she was leaving. "Ms. Dawson," he said, tone clipped, "I hope you realize Redwood Grove is an isolated case. The county needs bigger solutions. If you're not ready to sell, we can still collaborate. Summit Peak has the resources to help you produce cider at scale. Your orchard's brand potential is huge. Don't let some romantic notion limit your success." Carla's spine stiffened. "It's not romance," she replied. "It's responsibility to the land, to history, and to the community. I appreciate your offer, but Redwood Grove isn't a stepping stone for corporate expansion." Chang shook his head, exasperated. "Don't say we didn't offer." Summer gave way to fall, and Redwood Grove launched its first official cider labeled Redwood Revival. The limited release sold out at local markets almost immediately. Thanks in part to the backstory, Carla used the profits to reinvest in better equipment for the barn, and she paid a small bonus to the local high school agriculture students who had helped with orchard maintenance. This sense of momentum fueled the cooperative movement, leading half a dozen nearby farms to sign an agreement to share resources, co-market produce, and stand against unsolicited development. The hope was that if enough farmers joined in, they could formally petition the county to designate the entire area an agricultural heritage zone, guaranteeing certain protections for years to come. By mid-fall, the caretaker's cottage felt cozier, albeit cluttered with orchard paperwork, cider marketing materials, and a constant influx of curious visitors. Helena stopped by, frequently discussing strategies, funding updates, and restoration timelines for the main farmhouse. Jonah dove deeper into each new orchard management technique and began designing Redwood Grove's future tasting room layout. Tessa created her own orchard diaries, pressing leaves and blossoms onto each page. Carla found joy in seeing her children so engaged with their environment, something she'd never witnessed back in their cramped apartment. Yet a nagging worry lurked. Summit Peak's plan was still on the table, and Chang was known to be relentless. Each time a neighbor sold their land to him, Carla felt Redwood Grove's protective buffer shrink. The orchard risked becoming an island of green amid a sea of construction. At times, she lay awake at night, haunted by images of bulldozers flattening the rolling fields next door. What if Redwood Grove was outpaced by development all around it? Could a single orchard, no matter how special, stand firm against corporate pressure? She clutched Franklin Redwood's journal, rereading his old entries to reassure herself. His words about planting trees whose full maturity one may never witness reminded her that stewardship transcends immediate profits and personal timelines. One crisp evening, Carla decided to revisit the hidden safe's contents more thoroughly. She set out the old ledgers, letters, and Franklin Redwood's journal on the caretaker's kitchen table, while Tessa and Jonah hovered. Helena, who'd arrived for a quick meeting, joined them, with cups of hot apple cider steaming beside them. They carefully turned the yellowed pages. Redwood's journal entries depicted weather patterns, orchard experiments, and heartfelt musings about the farm's future. One entry from 1899 caught Carla's eye. Redwood wrote about receiving an offer from a large fruit company to buy the orchard's harvest in bulk, but they demanded he rip out his experimental trees in favor of standardized commercial varieties. He refused, believing that Redwood Grove's strength lay in its diversity and uniqueness. "That's so similar to what we're going through," Jonah remarked. "Big business tries to standardize everything. Redwood wanted to innovate, not just conform." Helena nodded with a sad smile. History repeats. We can learn from Redwood's perseverance. Another letter in the pile was addressed to Redwood's children, urging them to continue his work even if times grew tough. Carla wondered if they ever did. The genealogical records were spotty, but it appeared Redwood's descendants scattered after the Great Depression. The farm changed hands many times, eventually slipping into foreclosure before Helena had purchased it at auction. Perhaps Redwood's dream skipped a few generations only to awaken now. As they organized Redwood's documents, Carla found a handwritten map stuffed between ledger pages, an outline of Redwood Grove's boundary, clearly showing a north orchard distinct from the rest. It indicated a half-dozen experimental trees that Redwood had carefully documented. The map's date read 1905, which suggested Redwood had big plans for expansions or specialized breeding. Carla recognized the rough location as the most overgrown portion of the property, a place they hadn't tackled yet due to the sheer density of brush. They decided to investigate the next day. Armed with shears gloves and unstoppable curiosity, Carla led Jonah, Tessa, and Sam into the thick underbrush described on Redwood's map. Sure enough, behind a row of ancient oak trees, they found remnants of orchard rows nearly lost to decades of wild growth. Many trees had died or toppled, yet a few twisted trunks still stood, bearing a scattering of small apples. Dr. Oakley was called in, and she nearly jumped for joy at the discovery. "These could be Redwood's original experiments," she breathed. They collected samples, planning to send them for analysis. "If these apples have unique genetic markers, resistance to blight, and uncommon flavor profile, it could be huge for the orchard's market potential," Oakley explained excitedly. In the meantime, Carla felt a deeper connection to Redwood, as though she were walking in his footsteps. The orchard wasn't just about finances, it was living history. She imagined Redwood checking these very trees over a century ago, jotting notes in the same ledger she now held, hoping that someone down the line would care enough to continue. Over lunch, she told the kids, "This is bigger than just us wanting to keep a farm. We're carrying on someone's life's work." Redwood believed these apple varieties were special. "We have a responsibility to see if they are." The children nodded solemnly, each sensing their roles in this continuing story. Meanwhile, word leaked out about the discovered lost orchard. A local journalist published an article online, stirring more excitement. While many readers cheered the orchard's revival, Carla knew Summit Peak might see it as a marketing opportunity. if they ever got their hands on Redwood Grove. She tried not to dwell on that, focusing instead on helping Dr. Oakley test the new apples. But as Redwood Grove's star rose, so did the stakes, and Carla realized the months ahead would be decisive. Early winter arrived faster than Carla expected, ushering in colder nights and the orchard's dormant season. Yet Redwood Grove refused to fall into the quiet lull, typical of farmsteads at this time. Renovations on the main farmhouse progressed, with carpenters reinforcing the roof and upgrading electrical systems. Helena's trust continued to fund the essential work, but Carla had begun to see small profit streams from the orchard's initial cider sales. She used that income to pay a portion of the farmhouse restoration cost, wanting to prove her commitment to eventually buying Redwood Grove outright. Amid the construction commotion, Dr. Oakley delivered big news. Two of Redwood's experimental trees tested positive for highly unique traits, one with an extraordinary natural resistance to a common fungal disease, and the other with an unparalleled flavor complexity. The university's horticulture department is buzzing about it. Dr. Oakley informed Carla. They want to do further propagation trials. One day these cultivars might be widely adopted if they prove reliably hardy. Carla, lips curving in a proud grin, said, "That's amazing. And if Redwood Grove is the only place to get them right now, it positions us in a very special spot." Helena agreed, adding that they should trademark or patent the new varieties if possible. The farm also hosted its first winter at the orchard event. Locals came for a tour of the partially restored farmhouse, sipped warm mulled cider, and browsed Tessa's handmade pressed flower ornaments. Jonas set up a slideshow showing the orchard's transformation from a neglected property to a budding revival. Carla spoke briefly about Redwood's safe discovery, showcasing the old ledger and the newly found orchard map. The sense of community pride was palpable. Even Harriet's Cafe set up a stall offering fresh donuts and coffee. Attendance exceeded all expectations, with some visitors driving in from neighboring counties drawn by social media posts about Redwood Grove's hidden safe and rare apples. But overshadowing the festivities was the knowledge that Summit Peak's next big presentation to the Barton County Commissioners was only weeks away. Chang had snapped up more surrounding parcels, forging deals that left Redwood Grove in a precarious peninsula of farmland. Rumors circulated that he planned to propose an even grander development plan, pitched as a new Barton masterpiece complete with a commercial district and upscale amenities. Helena and Carla convened with a coalition of local farmers, attorneys, and environmental advocates to finalize an agricultural heritage district proposal. They wanted the commissioners to adopt it at the same time they considered Summit Peak's plan, effectively creating protective zoning for Redwood Grove and other participating farms. "It's going to be a showdown," Helena warned, laying out land use maps on Carla's kitchen table. "We have strong support, but Chang's not bluffing when he talks about big money and job creation. This is farmland versus future suburbia, and both sides believe they're right." Carla swallowed hard, recalling Redwood's journal entries about tough choices. If Redwood had defied commercial uniformity back in the late 1800s, maybe she could do the same now. As the orchard settled into dormancy, Carla threw herself into the battle for Redwood Grove. Press interviews, planning documents, and late-night conference calls with the cooperative's leadership became her new normal. She spent so many evenings drafting proposals that Tessa joked she should set up a desk in the barn so at least she could smell apples while she worked. Despite the stress, Carla felt an unshakable sense of purpose, as though Redwood's legacy guided her efforts. Jonah was proud. Tessa cheered her on, and Helena offered unwavering support. In rare moments of stillness, Carla would stand at the edge of the orchard, looking at the silent rows of trees now bare of leaves. She would imagine next spring's blooms and the fruit yet to come, telling herself that if Redwood Grove had survived a century of change, it could survive this corporate onslaught too. The day of reckoning arrived under a leaden winter sky, with a cold wind sweeping across Barton County. The county commissioners convened in an auditorium large enough to hold the massive crowd: farmers, developers, local citizens, and news crews. On one side, Robert Chang presented Summit Peak's master plan, a multi-phase development, promising housing, retail, and recreation for thousands of potential new residents. Slick charts boasted of tax revenues, job creation, and modernizing Barton County. On the other side, Helena and Carla introduced the Agricultural Heritage District, championed by Redwood Grove and allied farms. They explained how it wouldn't halt all development, but rather ensure farmland preservation, where it mattered most: places with historical significance. active production, and documented environmental value. Chang's voice was calm but firm as he praised Redwood Grove's orchard restoration, claiming Summit Peak could integrate it into a model green community. Carla took a deep breath and delivered her statement. She spoke of Franklin Redwood's journal of his vision for an orchard that would outlive him. She described discovering Redwood's hidden safe, the intangible riches of knowledge, history, and community, and the orchard's modern revival. While acknowledging Barton County needed growth, she pleaded for balanced growth that didn't erase the county's agricultural soul. Redwood Grove is an example of what can happen when we don't give up on old farms, she said, her voice resonating through the hushed hall. We found something priceless, not in gold, but in the heritage that's now feeding both our spirits and the local economy. I asked the commission to consider this heritage district as a blueprint for a future in which farmland isn't bulldozed but nurtured. After hours of tense public comment and behind-the-scenes negotiation, the commissioners emerged to announce their decision. In a split vote, they approved a modified version of Summit Peak's development, restricting it from key farmland areas and imposing strict water usage regulations. Crucially, they also passed the Agricultural Heritage District, granting Redwood Grove and several other farms the zoning protections they'd sought. The hall erupted in a cacophony of reactions, some cheering. Others disappointed. Carla found herself crying tears of relief embraced by Tessa and Jonah, with Helena clasping her hand. The final arrangement wasn't perfect. Summit Peak would still develop large swaths of the surrounding region, but Redwood Grove and its cooperative allies stood secure behind legal protections. Over time, Carla hoped the orchard's educational programs and cooperative marketing would demonstrate an alternative path, one that valued farmland for more than real estate. In the months that followed, Redwood Grove's orchard blossomed again, and the Redwood's legacy apples steadily gained acclaim. A handful of restaurants in the nearby city began featuring Redwood Grove cider on their menus, touting its historic roots. Tourists arrived intrigued by stories of a single mother who, against all odds, resurrected a forgotten orchard and discovered a hidden safe that transformed her life. Carla often reflected on the irony. The safe's gold coins were helpful, but nowhere near as life-changing as the ledgers in Redwood's journal. The knowledge and inspiration left behind by a man who loved his farm more than a century ago had ignited a future no one could have predicted. Now each spring, Carla would walk among the orchard's flowering rows with Jonah and Tessa at her side, Sam offering sage advice and Helena smiling with the satisfaction of seeing a dream shared across generations. Redwood Grove Farm was more than a piece of land. It was living testament to resilience and vision, a place where a single mother's bold gamble collided with a century-old dream to change not just her own fate, but the destiny of an entire rural community. As the sun set over the orchard on a chilly evening, Carla closed the caretaker's cottage door behind her, hands smelling of earth and apples. The renovated barn stood nearby, humming with the quiet purr of fermentation tanks. The farmhouse's windows glowed, construction nearly complete. She thought of Franklin Redwood's final journal entry about leaving a legacy that future hands would cultivate. She had found that legacy and in doing so created her own. It was a story of second chances, courage, and the enduring power of a seed planted with hope. And so Redwood Grove stood as a beacon in Barton County, proving that sometimes what changes everything isn't a pile of treasure, but a faith in the land and the people who nurture it. Looking back on this powerful journey, it's clear that real treasure isn't found in dollars alone. It's forged through resilience, legacy, and honor. Just like the American spirit you and I cherish. This single mother refused to back down in the face of corporate greed, turning an old farm into a beacon of hope for future generations. Willow Creek Farm now stands as a proud testament to preserving what truly matters: family values, hard work, and community pride. How did this story resonate with you? Have you ever faced a similar crossroads or battle to protect your heritage? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the American tradition of storytelling alive together.